No. Hi. I'm good. How are you? Yeah, it'll be just a second. Okay. Yeah, come on in. Sorry, this is the call. Yeah, they use the snake.
Okay, I'm going to continue. I'm recording this right now, just so that you can pick it up after you get back.
Okay.
The question about medical care increasing life expectancy is, again, I think that we do know that medical care can reduce the likelihood of death, but it has to be available to us. The medical care has become much more effective. There's a human pharmacologist that teaches, or that used to teach, at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill Medical School. I'm recording this now, so you can go back and pick up what you just missed.
Okay.
Who used to start off with his medical students and look at them in the eye and say, I want you to know doctors have killed more people than they've saved throughout history. And that is a bit of a over-the-top statement, but it is based in fact. Medical treatments are not effective, and it was very, very difficult to actually do much for many, many people, especially before we had any way to treat infections or anything else. We do have much better science now, however, it's a delivery issue. If we can't deliver the care, then it doesn't matter, and delivery is a part of it. We have very advanced technology now, but if we can't afford it, we can't get it to our patients, it's not going to produce. Let's go and look at chapter 16.
Dogs.
Here, a couple of things. This is international comparisons. You know, again, let's just make a few comments. The questions like which country is the healthiest, what we can correlate is that that health is very much dependent on the economics of the society. How much of your gross domestic product is being invested in health, and that varies all over the world, from less than 1% in places like Somalia and Sudan to and India to 18% in the United States, which is a lot. And of course, 1% in Somalia isn't very much money because they don't have much of a gross domestic product. 18% in the United States is a huge amount of money. Last year, we spent $3.85 trillion on healthcare, represented 18% of our gross domestic product. We do not have the best system on the planet. For that amount of money, we should be the healthiest nation on the planet. We should have the best medical system. We should have the best outcomes in every single measure. We don't. So there is, there is no necessarily direct relationship between health healthcare outcomes and the amount of money invested, because it all depends on where it goes. We have certain areas of this country that have very, very poor medical care. Most rural areas, we've been trying for years to get doctors to practice in rural areas where we need health care. And we'll do things like forgive their medical school debts. We'll do all sorts of things to try and give them an incentive. But many doctors are not interested in going off and doing, vaccinations and setting bones out in the middle of North Dakota when they can be some sort of specialist making $500,000 a year in San Francisco. There's a real issue with, you can't hear me. What's going on here? Okay, my computer says that it's picking up the sound. So you may have to just try and listen to this, because we're going to have to cut it off in about 15 minutes anyway. You may have to try and listen to this, and I can guarantee you it's going to be picked up in the recording. And I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on that you can't hear. We do have, I keep getting messages that my internet connection is unstable, but I don't see a problem. So we'll do the best we can. So can you hear me yet? Okay. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to keep talking. Okay. So I will do that. So while there is, we see this across countries and across regions. But even in this part of the United States, even in this part of the world, in the United States, Canada, and so forth, where we have really well-established medical systems, and the answer to this last question, does distribution of income within a company or country determine distribution of health? The answer to that is yes, it does. If we look especially at a couple of clear examples in the third world, again going back to Sudan, they have some very, very good physicians and some very good health facilities, but only available to those with the money. They're only in the cities. The people out in the bush get very little to no care. One of the best examples of how to deal with this has been Ghana, which is discussed in another chapter that you'll read later this week. They have really made an effort to deliver health care across the country. Now, Ghana is a small nation, but nonetheless, it's an example of what can be done if there is a will to do it. What differences are greatest across countries? Disparity in doctor supply, hospital technology, life expecting, or capital spending, or per capita spending, meaning per person spending. That per capita spending is probably the greatest difference. We spend 4,500, or is it 45,000? Yeah, we spend about $45,000 in this country per person a year on medical care. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not getting $45,000 worth of medical care. Now, I don't need it as much as other people do, but nonetheless, I don't feel I'm getting my money's worth. On the other hand, if the expenditure that's not being used for me is used for people who need it, then I'm all for that. But is there more trade in countries in goods, services, people, or ideas? This is another economic issue. Trade, international trade is a macroeconomic issue. Goods and services are traded between countries. In medicine, however, the major trade good that goes across international boundaries is pharmaceuticals. We think things like MRIs and CTs, medical equipment would as well, but it's specialized equipment, imaging equipment, specialized robotic surgery equipment, and so forth, requires technical experts to not only run it, but maintain it. So they're not all that widely distributed. Every major city, every capital city of every country will have some of these, but they're not available generally. So where it's people and ideas that are the major trade in medicine. Up until the middle of the 20th century, most medical advances came out of Europe that were used here in the West, came out of Europe. It's now switched. The United States is now one of the leading locations for medical science, although that's distributing more broadly. Let's see, let's look at market sizes. Macro versus micro versus macro. National luxury good. Okay. Remember, luxury goods are things that people will buy when they have an increase in income. These are labeled by economists as luxury goods, which means that in most ways, health becomes a luxury good. Now, most of us think of health ought to be different. It ought to be a human right. But nonetheless, from an economics viewpoint, to the view of the economist, nations will spend a lot more on healthcare when they have a lot more to spend. So that's why we see that as a luxury good at the national scale. It's not a luxury good for you when you're sick. It's a necessity, but that's the micro scale. That's you, as opposed to broadly distributed through the economy, which is the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics. You and I, in our daily activities, are engaging in macroeconomic transactions, whereas nations much higher. I'm going to let you skim through this chapter. There's a lot of information here. We have descriptions here in the several tiers of income levels in countries. That's an interesting snapshot of when this textbook was written. And the interesting part is that the author has those sections written by people in these countries who are experts on those countries' healthcare system. So this isn't the author's opinion at this point. It is based on people actually practicing in those countries. International trade in healthcare, we see this a lot. And what we see is not that there is a certain amount. I mean, we talk about medical tourism. Again, you can go to a country if you can't get or afford surgery. A friend of ours needed to have hip surgery. his medical system, he didn't have medical care, and he ended up going to India to get his care, get his surgery. They did something called it wasn't a hip replacement, it was a restructuring of the joints in his hip. And it cost him, in terms of travel, his stay in India, his medical care in India cost him 1/10 of what it would have cost here in the United States. And where were the doctors trained? In the UK and the US. They were all trained at major medical schools in the West. So the major difference is not in the quality of care, in the economy in which they come from. Getting even 10% of what they would get here, live like kings in those societies, because the societies are so economically different from ours. The interesting thing is that if we look at the ultimate macroeconomic measure, gross world product, 10% of that is healthcare, except that there's very little trade. We can go back and forth with drugs and equipment. It doesn't matter where your wheelchair is made. Drugs and can generally be trusted, no matter what their source is. If you are getting drugs that are approved for sale here in the United States, we can cross borders to get surgical procedures, such as my friend, and it's not. It does, but it's not a major issue. Most people will not and cannot afford to travel halfway around the world for cheaper medical care. Where we have the international trade is in knowledge, information, and in people. We have a chronic shortage because of the way we educate and the way we control the number of people. A chronic shortage of healthcare workers. So we import them. Many people will come here. The person who is providing my father's 24/7 care is from Ghana. And she's very, very good. She's well trained. She knows her stuff. She knows what she can and cannot do. So it's really quite common. We see this all the time. I want to quickly switch over here to the last two chapters. The problem with chapter 17, it's worth reading, but you have to remember that chapter 17 is about the Affordable Health Care Act, which, as of the writing of this book, had not been fully implemented. So there's a lot of information there, but and especially how it came about. The section 17.3 on using existing plans as models is actually quite good. But we learn more about that so you probably learned more about it there. But it's worth taking a quick look at. So let's quickly now, because I'm going to have to cut this off in a few minutes, is looking at the way into the future. The problem that I have with this chapter, of course, is that in many ways that future has already occurred. We're seeing that healthcare expenditures are very much in the national dialogue today. The healthcare for all debate, no matter what either of us think about healthcare for all, is something that can only have a healthy outcome, and that's not for all of us, because it will force us to think about how we do distribute healthcare through our society, because there are stark differences depending on the region of the country, depending on your social status. In other words, the wealthy get what they want, and the poor, white, black, or otherwise, get the dregs, if any at all. So what is, and a debate about why we should have health. Now, I've never understood the opposition of many business groups to having a much broader medical system, because the ultimate outcome, yes, it will be expensive, but the ultimate outcome will actually probably be lower if people are less ill. You also don't have the economic costs of lost work. You don't have all the other factors that actually play into this, the problem. So there are a lot of things I don't quite understand about the attitude of many here, because to me it's pretty clear a healthier society is a more productive society. And to me that's an easy equation. However, that might be why I'm not a politician. So I'm too logical. Anyway, this chapter is, I would suggest you take a look at especially parts 7 and 8 here, because the projection, very short projection here in this section beyond, if we just take a look at those trends, we see that there are a lot of things we can expect. This is a list that now is probably out of date simply because of the current debate about where we're going. And a lot of other things. Health informatics has taken off a lot even since this book has been published. So we see a lot of these trends. Let me go one more page, see if that's where that is. No, okay. Let's back up just a bit. If we take a look, at these projections, and using the census projections from a number of different sources, that our healthcare spending will level off. But take a look at where we are today. Right now, today, we're at 18% of the gross national product, gross domestic product. And the estimate here is that it's going to approach, it looks like, about 25% of our gross domestic product by the middle of this century. So, again, keeping in mind that any projection because it cannot possibly take in every potential variation that you need to consider. But nonetheless, overall, this is probably pretty accurate. And part of the reason that it's pretty accurate is that we have an aging population here in the United States. And those of us who are older eat up more of the resources. So, do you have any questions?
No.
No, okay. Then let's go quickly and take a look at this. This week's discussion is, come on, wake up, is to I'd like to hear your thoughts on healthcare reform, strictly here rather than nature, goals, and impact. What you think may be needed, because it will direct what your thinking is in the future. So we're going to modify that slightly. We go back here, this week's assignment is the role of a market-oriented healthcare system in providing necessary services. I think that, remember, a market-oriented healthcare system is as opposed to one that is not driven by profit. So keep that in mind as you're writing that paper. And lastly, you have your final assessment, and that's it. So go ahead and get caught up. You've done a great job of catching up. Let's get this finished out successfully and get you going on to your next mod. You need to probably contact Christy about your schedule, because even though with my other student, I'm going to be handing her schedule, I don't have yours. If I learn anything, if I actually have it, I'll drop you an email. Okay? Okay, great. Well, have a good week. If I have anything else to say, I'll record a quick session and then send you an email about that. Other than that, let's finish this out and be good. It's been a good learning experience, I think. I hope you've learned a lot in this class. I certainly have, going back over this text for the multiple times. I've learned more, again, reading than I thought I would. But it is a fascinating area of study. Okay, in that case, I'm going to cut this off. And if you are on campus getting your computer fixed, I will be on campus by about 10 a.m.
Okay.
See you later. Okay. So I will record this and post the video and send you the link. Okay.
Okay.